God's word in human language and human culture. That is the first fundamental difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. That's the first fundamental difference. The second difference is time. Time. Now we've said it's like a project plan, the Old Testament or Genesis to Malachi. The other one is now the project that God has commenced. Whereas drawing the plan and giving us a 3D presentation of that plan is Genesis to Malachi. Then we have from Matthew to Revelation, where the project now commenced, was inaugurated and started, and is still ongoing. So he begins to build and build, and in the building you go back and look at what you are building. So every time you build for some time, you go back to the plan, you go back to the 3D and make sure what you have built so far agrees with the design and the project plan. That's how you keep building, because the only way you can build you is to understand the plan. If you don't understand the plan, you cannot build according to the pattern. So where is the plan of God again? Genesis to Malachi, where the commencement of the plan started in the New Testament books. Now the only way you can understand that commencement is to go back and look at the plan again. Go back and look at the plan again. In Luke chapter 24 verse 44 to 45, PJ, please pay attention. Luke 24, 44 to 45.
And he said unto them, These are the words which I spake unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses, and in the prophets, and in the Psalms concerning me. Then opened he their understanding, that they might understand the scriptures.
So at that point we say the Bible is the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. The law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. Now I told you that Jesus, towards his death, taught a lot from the book of Psalms. Did I say that yesterday? Towards his death, he taught a lot from the book of Psalms. In fact, his last conversation with the Pharisees before his arrest, look at that last conversation, Matthew the 22nd chapter, the 41st verse to 45. Read for me, PJ. Matthew 22, 41 to 45.
While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, saying, What think ye of Christ? Whose son is he? They say unto him, the son of David.
Next verse.
He saith unto them, How then doth David in spirit call him Lord, saying, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. If David then call him Lord, how is he his son?
Next verse.
And no man was able to answer him a word, neither durst any man from that day forth ask him any more questions.
That was the end of his discussion with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And it was from David. Why do David then in spirit call him Lord if he's David's son? By Matthew 26, 27, he is arrested. And then he's crucified. And he continued speaking from the Psalms. Even when he was arrested, Psalm 110 verse 1. Read for me, PJ. Psalm 110 verse 1.
The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool.
So he continued speaking and continued speaking. When he got on the cross, what we see him do on the cross, look at Matthew 47, 26. Matthew chapter 47 verse 26. Matthew 47, 26. Sorry, Matthew 27, 26.
Then released he Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified.
Next verse.
Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall, and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers.
Next verse.
And they stripped him, and put on him a scarlet robe.
Next verse.
And when they had plaited a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him, and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews.
Next verse.
And when they spit upon him, and took the reed, and smote him on the head.
Next verse.
And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe off from him, and put his own raiment on him, and led him away to crucify him.
Next verse.
And as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross.
Next verse.
And when they were come unto a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of a skull,
Next verse.
they gave him vinegar to drink mingled with gall, and when he had tasted thereof, he would not drink.
Next verse.
And they crucified him and parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots.
And I hope that you know that that is from the book of Psalms, right? That's from the book of Psalms. Next verse.
And sitting down, they watched him there,
Next verse.
and set up over his head his accusation written, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews.
Next verse.
Then were there two thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand and another on the left.
Next verse.
And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads,
Next verse.
and saying, Thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross.
So it went on and on and on and on until on that cross he cried, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, quoting from Psalm 22 verse 1. Put it up for me. Psalms 22 verse 1.
My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring?
So even on the cross, it was the words of David that Jesus spoke. When he goes to the grave, Peter tells us he is fulfilling Psalm 16. You will not suffer your Holy One to see corruption. He's still quoting that from Psalms. If I look at where Peter told us, Acts 2:25 to 27. Acts chapter 2 verse 25 to 27.
For David speaketh concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is on my right hand, that I should not be moved.
Next verse.
Therefore did my heart rejoice, and my tongue was glad. Moreover also my flesh shall rest in hope.
Next verse.
Because thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption.
Peter told us those were the words that came out of Jesus' mouth. And Peter knew those were the words because Peter saw them in Psalm 16 verse 8 to 9. Psalm 16 verse number 8 to 9.
I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved.
Next verse.
Therefore my heart is glad, and my glory rejoiceth. My flesh also shall rest in hope.
Next verse.
For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption.
Now, thou will not leave my soul in hell. So those words that Jesus spoke in the grave, Peter could say because Peter knew this is what was written in the scriptures concerning him. And when he rose from the dead, Psalm 110 verse 1, where the words he spoke when he rose from the dead, sit at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool, seated at the right hand of majesty on high. And on the day of Pentecost, Peter also tells us how that on that day of Pentecost, words which Jesus spoke during his trial period. Acts chapter 2 verse 19 to 21, PJ. Acts 2, 19 to 21.
And I will show wonders in heaven above and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke.
Next verse.
The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood, before that great and notable day of the Lord come.
Next verse.
And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved.
Next verse.
Ye men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs, which God did by him in the midst of you, as ye yourselves also know.
Next verse.
Him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, ye have taken, and by wicked hands have crucified and slain.
Next verse.
Whom God hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it.
Peter, God, is not possible that he should be holding of death. God losing from the pains of death. He got it from David again in the Psalms. And if you observe, Peter quoted also from Joel, one of the prophets of the Old Testament. So, even in his resurrection, all the words that were spoken were from the book of Psalms. When they were going to replace Judas Iscariot or Scarot, all the things that were spoken about the replacement of Judas, Peter quoted them from the book of Psalms. Let his office let another man take is from the book of Psalms they quoted. So the book of Psalms therefore has a very important significance in the crux of the event of Jesus' life.